You already know the feeling. The moment someone opens their mouth, and within seconds you realize you are dealing with a mind that refuses to think. The confidence is there, the volume is there, but the substance is missing. Yet somehow you are the one who leaves the conversation exhausted, not them, you. And this is the paradox that intelligent people quietly suffer from. Intelligence does not protect you from stupidity. In fact, it often makes you more vulnerable to it, because the intelligent mind has a fatal weakness. It assumes the other person is playing the same game. It assumes that arguments are about truth, that evidence matters, that logic has weight. Arthur Schopenhauer understood something most people never realize. Stupidity is not just the absence of intelligence. It is a completely different operating system. And once you understand that, the way you deal with people changes forever. Most intelligent people make the same mistake. They believe their intellect gives them an advantage in every interaction. But the moment they face someone truly irrational, their greatest strength becomes their biggest liability. Because intelligence makes you engage. It makes you analyze. It makes you explain. And the more you explain, the deeper you fall into a trap. Imagine trying to play chess with someone who flips the board every time they start losing. You sit there thinking about strategy, planning 3 moves ahead, calculating outcomes. Meanwhile, the other person is simply ignoring the rules entirely. Who wins that game? Not the person with the better strategy. The person who refuses to follow the rules of the game. This is exactly what happens when intelligence confronts stupidity. Schopenhauer saw this dynamic centuries ago. In his brutal observations of human nature, he noticed something disturbing. People do not argue to discover truth. They argue to defend their ego. And when the ego feels threatened, logic becomes the enemy. The intelligent person believes arguments are solved with better reasoning. The foolish person believes arguments are won by refusing to admit defeat. That is why debates with fools feel like running on a treadmill. You are moving, you are speaking, you are explaining, but you are going nowhere. Psychology later gave this phenomenon a name, the Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias where people with low ability drastically overestimate their competence. But the real danger is not the ignorance itself. The real danger is the confidence attached to it. Ignorance with humility can learn. Ignorance with confidence becomes indestructible. And when you try to correct it, something strange happens. The more evidence you present, the more aggressively they defend their position. This confuses intelligent people, because in their mind, new evidence should lead to new conclusions. But in the mind of a fool, conclusions come first. Evidence is accepted or rejected depending on whether it protects their pride. Daniel Kahneman described the human mind as operating through 2 systems. System 1 is fast, emotional, instinctive. System 2 is slow, analytical, rational. Intelligent people spend most of their time in System 2. They analyze information carefully. They evaluate arguments logically. But fools live almost entirely in System 1. Their opinions are emotional reactions disguised as facts. So when you try to engage them logically, you are essentially speaking a language they do not understand. It is like explaining physics to someone who refuses to believe gravity exists. No amount of explanation will change their mind because their belief is not based on logic to begin with. And this is where Schopenhauer's brutal clarity enters the conversation. He believed the intelligent person must stop trying to win arguments with fools, not because the fool deserves respect, but because the argument itself is meaningless. When you argue with someone incapable of reasoning, you are not engaging in dialogue. You are participating in a performance where the outcome was decided before the conversation even began. Yet intelligent people keep doing it. Why? Because intelligence also creates a psychological addiction. The addiction to being right. You want the other person to recognize the flaw in their thinking. You want the moment where they pause and say, "You know what? You're right." But that moment almost never comes. And the longer you wait for it, the more energy you lose. Schopenhauer would say the intelligent person must learn a painful lesson. Being right and proving you are right are 2 completely different things. The need to prove it is where most people lose their power, because the fool does not care about truth. The fool cares about status. Every argument becomes a competition for dominance. If they admit you are right, they feel smaller. So instead, they double down. They repeat themselves. They distort your argument. They change the subject. They do anything except admit error. And without realizing it, you start playing their game. You become frustrated. Your voice tightens. Your patience disappears. And suddenly the intelligent person in the room looks emotional, while the fool appears calm and confident. The dynamic has reversed. Schopenhauer observed that once this happens, the fool has already won, not intellectually, but psychologically, because they have dragged you down into the chaos where they feel comfortable. This is why intelligent people often feel strangely drained after interacting with foolish individuals. It is not the conversation itself that exhausts them. It is the constant mental effort required to translate reality into something the other person refuses to understand. You explain, they resist. You clarify, they ignore, you simplify. They repeat the same flawed idea again. It becomes an endless loop. But what most intelligent people fail to realize is that the exhaustion they feel is not accidental. It is structural. The foolish mind does not need to think deeply. It only needs to resist change. That requires almost no mental energy. Meanwhile, you are doing all the cognitive labor. You are analyzing every sentence, constructing better arguments, searching for clearer explanations. You are fighting a war that only one side is actually participating in. And this is where Schopenhauer introduces a radical shift in perspective. The intelligent person must stop trying to educate fools. Not because education is useless, but because fools rarely seek it. They seek validation. They seek attention. They seek the feeling of being correct. When you argue with them, you give them exactly what they want. Your attention becomes their reward. Your frustration becomes their proof of importance. They feel powerful simply because they manage to provoke a reaction from you. And once you see this clearly, the strategy begins to change. The goal is no longer to defeat the fool with logic. The goal is to remove yourself from the battlefield entirely. But doing that requires something most intelligent people struggle with. You must abandon the desire to be understood by people who cannot understand you. And that is harder than it sounds, because it forces you to confront an uncomfortable truth about human nature itself. Not everyone wants clarity. Not everyone values intelligence, and not everyone is capable of seeing beyond their own limited perspective. Schopenhauer believed that once you accept this reality, your relationship with foolish people transforms completely. Instead of trying to fix them, you begin observing them. Instead of arguing, you study the patterns. And once you see those patterns clearly, you begin to realize something unsettling. Stupidity is not random. It follows predictable rules, and those rules can be used against it. Once you begin to see the patterns of stupidity, something strange happens. The chaos you once felt around foolish people starts to look predictable, almost mechanical. Their reactions follow the same script over and over again. They interrupt before understanding. They reject ideas before hearing them fully. They repeat the same point louder instead of improving it. And most importantly, they cling to certainty the moment doubt appears. This is not accidental behavior. It is psychological. Schopenhauer believed that the average human mind is not built to pursue truth relentlessly. It is built to protect the ego. And the ego has one primary rule: never admit weakness. The intelligent person approaches a conversation like a scientist examining a theory. If new evidence appears, the theory changes. But the foolish mind approaches conversation like a soldier defending territory. Every new idea is perceived as an invasion. Every correction feels like humiliation. Every disagreement becomes a threat to identity. Once you understand this, the first rule of dealing with foolish people becomes painfully obvious. Do not attack their conclusions directly, because the moment you do, their mind locks into defense mode. And once that happens, logic becomes irrelevant. Imagine telling someone who built their entire identity around a belief that the belief is wrong. You are not just challenging an idea, you are challenging their sense of self. The brain interprets that as danger. Neuroscience actually confirms this reaction. When people encounter information that contradicts their deeply held beliefs, the brain activates the same threat response it uses when facing physical danger. The amygdala lights up, adrenaline rises, rational processing shuts down. At that point, you are not debating a mind. You are dealing with a nervous system trying to survive. This is why intelligent people often feel like their arguments are being ignored completely, because in many cases they are. The foolish mind is not processing your logic. It is searching for ways to protect itself. And the simplest method of protection is denial. Schopenhauer recognized that denial is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. A fool can deny facts, deny evidence, deny reality itself if admitting the truth would injure their pride. That is why arguing directly rarely works. You think you are dismantling their logic, but they are not attached to logic in the first place. They are attached to the feeling of being correct. And feelings are much harder to dismantle than arguments. This is where intelligent people make their second critical mistake. They increase the intensity of their reasoning. They believe if the first explanation did not work, a more detailed explanation will succeed. So they bring more evidence, more statistics, more examples. They construct a flawless case, and yet the other person still refuses to accept it. This creates a deep psychological frustration, because to the intelligent mind, the answer seems obvious. The reasoning is clear. The conclusion is unavoidable. But Schopenhauer would say that clarity does not matter when the audience refuses to see. In fact, the clearer your logic becomes, the more threatened the fool feels, and the more aggressively they resist it. So instead of persuasion, the conversation becomes escalation. The fool raises their voice. They interrupt more frequently. They accuse you of arrogance. Suddenly the debate shifts away from the idea itself. It becomes personal. Your intelligence is reframed as arrogance. Your evidence is reframed as manipulation. Your calm reasoning is reframed as condescension. This is a common defense mechanism. When someone cannot defeat your argument intellectually, they attempt to discredit you emotionally. If they can portray you as arrogant or aggressive, the audience stops focusing on the argument and starts focusing on your personality. The discussion collapses into drama, and drama is the natural habitat of foolish minds. But Schopenhauer discovered something important here. The intelligent person does not need to defeat the fool in their own arena, because the fool's arena is built entirely on emotional chaos. Instead, the intelligent person must shift the frame of the interaction itself. And the most effective way to do that is through something completely unexpected. Agreement, not genuine agreement. Strategic agreement. When a fool presents a ridiculous argument, your instinct is to oppose it. But opposition gives them energy. Opposition confirms the importance of their position. Schopenhauer realized that nothing destabilizes a foolish mind faster than exaggerated validation. Imagine someone confidently declares that reading books is useless and that real intelligence comes only from life experience. Most people would argue about the importance of knowledge in education, but a different response completely changes the dynamic. Instead of arguing, you nod slowly and say something unexpected. You might say, "You are absolutely right. In fact, if books are useless, then universities must be the biggest scam in history. We should probably shut them all down. No libraries, no research, just pure life experience." Think about the consequences of that response. You did not attack their claim. You accepted it fully, but you pushed it forward to its extreme conclusion. Suddenly the foolish person must confront the absurdity of their own logic. And because the absurdity came from their premise, they cannot easily accuse you of misunderstanding them. They are forced to retreat. They might start modifying their statement, adding exceptions, introducing nuance they previously rejected. Without realizing it, they begin arguing against their own original position. This is what philosophers call reductio ad absurdum, taking an argument to its logical extreme until it reveals its own flaw. But Schopenhauer saw it as more than a philosophical technique. He saw it as a psychological weapon, because fools rarely think beyond the immediate surface of their ideas. They stop at the emotional satisfaction of their conclusion. They do not follow the chain of consequences. When you calmly follow that chain for them, their confidence begins to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. The beauty of this strategy is that it requires very little energy from you. You are not constructing elaborate arguments. You are simply amplifying their own logic until it breaks. And once you experience this shift for the first time, something inside your perspective changes. You realize you do not need to fight every foolish statement you hear. You can let the foolish mind expose itself. But this technique introduces a deeper psychological transformation as well, because it forces you to detach emotionally from the conversation. You are no longer trying to win approval. You are observing a process. You become curious rather than frustrated, and curiosity is a powerful shield against emotional exhaustion. Instead of reacting to every irrational comment, you begin studying the patterns behind them. You start noticing how often fools repeat the same defensive behaviors, how they interrupt when challenged, how they change topics when cornered, how they rely on emotional language instead of precise reasoning. Once you see these patterns clearly, their behavior becomes predictable, and what is predictable becomes manageable. But there is an even darker realization waiting behind this understanding, because once you learn how to deal with foolish people effectively, you start noticing something uncomfortable. They are everywhere, not just online, not just in distant circles. They exist in offices, families, institutions, even positions of authority, and that realization raises a much more dangerous question. How do intelligent people survive when the fool is not just someone in a conversation, but someone in power? The moment a foolish person gains power, the entire dynamic changes. When a fool is simply another voice in a conversation, you can ignore them, outmaneuver them, or walk away. But when the fool controls your salary, your promotion, your reputation, or your opportunities, walking away is no longer simple. And this is where intelligent people often make the most dangerous mistake of all. They assume that competence will eventually reveal itself. They believe that if they work hard enough, think clearly enough, and perform well enough, the truth will naturally rise to the surface. But Schopenhauer had no patience for this optimism. He observed something much darker about human hierarchies. Power does not always rise to intelligence. Often it rises to confidence, aggression, and the ability to dominate perception. A foolish person with authority is not simply an inconvenience. They are a psychological hazard, because their position constantly exposes them to people who are smarter than they are. And that exposure creates a quiet terror inside them. They might never admit it consciously, but on some level they know. They sense when someone in the room thinks faster than they do. They notice when someone understands things they do not. And that realization triggers a deep insecurity. Now imagine the situation from their perspective. If they allow intelligent people to shine openly, they risk exposing their own limitations. Every clever idea becomes a silent comparison. Every sharp observation becomes a mirror reflecting their inadequacy. And insecure minds hate mirrors. So instead of rewarding intelligence, they begin suppressing it. Not openly, not obviously, but subtly and they might interrupt you more often. They might ignore your suggestions in meetings. They might frame your confidence as arrogance or your independence as disobedience. Slowly the narrative shifts. The intelligent person becomes labeled as difficult or not a team player. And once that narrative takes hold, logic no longer matters. Reputation takes over. Schopenhauer understood that mediocrity in power always seeks comfort in surrounding itself with more mediocrity, because mediocre minds feel safest when no one around them threatens their sense of superiority. This is why many intelligent people find themselves stuck in environments where their abilities are not valued, or worse, quietly resented. They walk into the room believing that brilliance will naturally be recognized, but recognition requires perception. And foolish authority figures are often blind to the very qualities that threaten them. This is why Schopenhauer warned that displaying conspicuous intelligence in the presence of mediocrity can be a dangerous mistake, not because intelligence is wrong, but because timing matters. In certain environments, revealing your full intellectual capacity too early is like shining a spotlight on yourself in a room filled with insecure egos. Instead of admiration, it invites hostility. The intelligent person must learn a skill that feels uncomfortable at first: strategic invisibility. This does not mean suppressing your intelligence completely. It means controlling when and how it appears. Imagine intelligence not as a badge you wear proudly on your chest, but as a blade hidden beneath your coat. You do not reveal it during every conversation. You do not wave it around to prove its sharpness. You keep it concealed until the exact moment it becomes necessary. History offers many examples of people who mastered this strategy. One of the most famous comes from ancient China. A man named Sima Yi served under a powerful but impulsive warlord who deeply feared anyone more intelligent than himself. Sima Yi was widely known as a brilliant strategist, which made him an immediate threat in the eyes of his superior. If he openly displayed his brilliance, he risked execution. If he challenged authority, he would be crushed. So he chose a different path. He allowed the illusion of weakness to grow around him. When spies came to observe him, they reported that he looked tired, slow, even slightly incompetent. He pretended to forget things. He acted hesitant in public discussions. To outsiders, it seemed as if his once brilliant mind had faded. His superior relaxed, the perceived threat disappeared. But behind the scenes, Sima Yi continued to analyze every political shift, every military movement, every weakness in the system, and when the moment finally arrived, he moved with astonishing speed. The man who is believed to be harmless suddenly orchestrated a precise political takeover that reshaped an empire. The lesson here is not about deception for its own sake. It is about survival in environments where intelligence itself becomes a threat. Schopenhauer understood that when dealing with powerful fools, open confrontation rarely ends well. The fool controls the structure. They control the rules of engagement. Challenging them directly inside that structure is like challenging a king inside his own castle. Even if you are right, the walls belong to him. So the intelligent person must learn to operate differently. Instead of confronting the ego of the powerful fool, you feed it small doses of validation. Not excessive praise, but just enough to keep their insecurity calm. Ask for their opinion on minor issues. Allow them to feel like the authority in certain moments. This is not submission. It is anesthesia. You are calming the ego so it stops looking for threats. While their attention rests comfortably on their own sense of importance, you quietly move forward with your own objectives. The key is emotional discipline. Intelligent people often struggle with this because their pride pushes them to correct obvious mistakes. When a superior makes a foolish decision, every instinct screams to challenge it. But sometimes the smarter move is patience, because foolish leaders often expose their own weaknesses over time. Their impulsiveness creates contradictions. Their confidence leads them into mistakes. And when those mistakes accumulate, the environment shifts naturally. People begin noticing the cracks. The authority figure loses credibility without you having to attack them directly. In that moment, the intelligent person who remained calm and observant suddenly appears stable and reliable. The contrast becomes obvious without confrontation. This is why Schopenhauer valued detachment so highly. He believed the intelligent mind must learn to step back from the emotional turbulence created by foolish people. Because once emotion takes control, intelligence loses its strategic advantage. The fool thrives in emotional conflict. It is their natural territory. But the intelligent person must operate in a colder space, a place where observation replaces reaction. And once you learn to operate from that space, something interesting begins to happen. You stop seeing foolish people as enemies. You begin seeing them as predictable systems. Their reactions follow patterns. Their insecurities guide their behavior. Their ego becomes a lever that can be gently moved without them realizing it. But this realization introduces a deeper shift in perspective, because once you see how predictable foolish behavior is, another question quietly appears. If fools can be understood and managed so easily, why do so many intelligent people still struggle with them every day? The answer lies not in the foolish mind, but in the hidden weaknesses of the intelligent one. The real battle between intelligence and stupidity does not happen in conversations. It happens inside your own mind. Because the greatest weakness of intelligent people is not that they cannot defeat foolish arguments, it is that they often feel compelled to try. Something inside them refuses to let nonsense exist without correction. They hear a flawed statement, and their brain immediately begins constructing the counter. They hear misinformation, and they feel an almost physical urge to intervene. At first, this feels like responsibility, like intellectual honesty. But Schopenhauer believed this impulse can quietly become a trap, because it gives foolish people control over your attention. And attention is the most valuable resource you possess. Think about how many hours intelligent people lose every year arguing with people who have no intention of learning. Debates online, arguments with coworkers, endless conversations with relatives who repeat the same irrational beliefs year after year. The intelligent person enters these interactions believing they are defending truth, but what actually happens is something far less noble. They become stuck in a cycle of reaction. Every foolish comment becomes bait. Every irrational opinion becomes a hook, pulling their attention away from things that actually matter. And fools have an endless supply of bait. They will argue about anything: politics, economics, science, social issues, personal choices. The topic does not matter. What matters is the emotional energy the argument creates. Because for the foolish mind, attention itself is victory. It validates their existence. When you argue with them, you confirm that their opinions deserve engagement, that their ideas deserve analysis, and that confirmation is exactly what they want. Schopenhauer would argue that this is why many intelligent people remain exhausted despite their mental advantages. They spend their energy in the wrong places. They fight battles that cannot be won because the battlefield itself is meaningless. Meanwhile, the truly strategic minds avoid these conflicts entirely. They conserve their energy for problems that actually produce results. There is a concept in psychology called cognitive load. It describes the limited amount of mental effort the brain can sustain before performance begins to decline. Every time you engage in a pointless argument, your brain spends energy processing emotional tension, constructing responses, predicting reactions, and managing frustration. Over time, this drains your cognitive resources. The result is subtle but powerful. Your focus weakens, your patience shortens, your creativity declines. Meanwhile, the foolish person feels none of this exhaustion because they are not analyzing anything deeply. They are simply reacting. This imbalance creates a strange paradox. The intelligent person ends the conversation feeling mentally depleted, while the foolish person walks away feeling victorious, not because they proved anything, but because they survived the argument without changing their mind. Schopenhauer recognized this dynamic long before modern psychology described it. He believed that wisdom begins when a person learns to stop engaging with every provocation, not because the provocation is correct, but because responding to it is strategically pointless. Imagine walking through a crowded street where random strangers shout insults at you. If you stopped to respond to each one, you would never reach your destination. The intelligent person must develop the same discipline in intellectual interactions. Not every statement deserves a reply. Not every opinion deserves correction. Silence, in many cases, is not weakness. It is efficiency. But silence requires emotional control, because the urge to respond can feel overwhelming, especially when the foolish person is confident, loud, and publicly wrong. Your instinct tells you that allowing the statement to pass unchallenged feels like surrender, but Schopenhauer would argue that this instinct comes from pride, not wisdom. The intelligent ego wants recognition. It wants the room to acknowledge that you understand the subject better. It wants the satisfaction of seeing the other person forced into silence. But the pursuit of that satisfaction often costs more than it gives, because the foolish mind rarely admits defeat. It simply shifts tactics. When logic fails, it moves to sarcasm. When sarcasm fails, it moves to personal attacks. When personal attacks fail, it moves to emotional drama. And suddenly the original topic disappears completely. The conversation becomes noise. The intelligent person is pulled deeper into the chaos while the fool feels increasingly comfortable. Schopenhauer believed the solution to this trap lies in detachment. Not emotional coldness toward everyone, but selective detachment toward those who demonstrate that reasoning with them is impossible. This detachment changes the entire experience of dealing with foolish people. Instead of seeing them as adversaries, you begin seeing them as predictable phenomena. Like storms, you do not argue with a storm. You prepare for it. You step aside and let it pass. The same principle applies to foolish minds. Their reactions follow patterns. Their arguments repeat themselves. Their emotional defenses appear at the same predictable moments. Once you observe these patterns enough times, their behavior loses its power to frustrate you. You stop expecting insight where none exists. You stop hoping for understanding where the capacity for it is missing. And when those expectations disappear, something remarkable happens. The emotional weight of these interactions disappears as well. You hear a foolish statement, and instead of anger, you feel a quiet recognition. You have seen this pattern before. The overconfidence, the refusal to consider alternatives, The emotional attachment to being right, it becomes almost clinical, an observation rather than a confrontation. This is the moment when intelligence begins transforming into something more powerful than clever arguments. It becomes discipline, the discipline to choose where your mind invests its effort, because once you truly understand how much energy foolish people can drain from your life, you start asking a deeper question. If so much of the world operates on ego, emotion, and irrational confidence, what happens when you stop trying to change it and start learning how to quietly navigate it instead? That question leads to a realization that Schopenhauer considered both liberating and unsettling. The goal of intelligence is not to correct every foolish mind around you. The goal is to build a life where their noise no longer controls your direction. And achieving that requires one final shift in perspective, a shift that separates people who merely understand intelligence from those who actually know how to use it. At a certain point, the intelligent person reaches a quiet realization that changes everything. The goal was never to defeat foolish people. The goal was to stop letting them control your mental world. Because if you look closely at your life, you will notice something unsettling. The fools around you rarely change. The coworker who speaks confidently about things they barely understand will likely continue doing so for years. The relative who rejects every logical explanation will repeat the same arguments again and again. The loud voice in the room that dominates conversations with shallow certainty will probably keep doing it long after you stop listening. They remain exactly as they are. But the intelligent person is the one who evolves. The frustration fades. The emotional reactions disappear. And what replaces them is something much colder and far more powerful: clarity. You begin to see foolish behavior for what it truly is. Not an intellectual opponent to defeat, but a predictable force of nature. Just like wind or rain, you do not become angry at the wind for blowing. You do not shout at the rain for falling. You simply adjust your movement around it. Schopenhauer believed that the moment you stop fighting stupidity directly is the moment you finally rise above it. Because most people spend their entire lives trapped inside pointless psychological battles. They argue endlessly about politics, opinions, beliefs, and interpretations. They waste enormous amounts of energy trying to change minds that are already closed, and in doing so, they sacrifice something far more valuable than the argument itself. Their time. Time is the one resource that cannot be replenished. Every hour spent explaining reality to someone who refuses to understand it is an hour that could have been spent building something meaningful. Your ideas, your skills, your ambitions, your peace of mind. The truly intelligent person eventually realizes that the world is not a classroom where everyone is waiting to be enlightened. It is a landscape of different minds operating on different levels of awareness. Some people seek knowledge. Some people resist it. Some people build things. Others simply react to them. Once you see this clearly, your strategy shifts. You stop trying to elevate every conversation around you. Instead, you become selective. Selective about the people you engage with, selective about the arguments you entertain, selective about where your attention flows. And attention, more than intelligence itself, becomes your greatest weapon, because attention determines the direction of your life. Whatever occupies your mind repeatedly will shape your thinking, your energy, and eventually your future. If foolish arguments occupy your attention every day, your mind slowly adapts to that environment. Your thoughts become reactive instead of creative. Your focus narrows to trivial conflicts instead of meaningful goals. But when you withdraw your attention from that chaos, a different space opens. A quieter mental environment where deeper thinking becomes possible again. This is why Schopenhauer valued solitude so highly. Not isolation from humanity entirely, but distance from the constant noise created by minds that refuse to think clearly. In that distance, intelligence begins to sharpen again. Ideas become deeper. Observations become clearer. The mind regains the ability to focus on things that actually matter. And ironically, once you stop chasing recognition from foolish people, your presence begins to change as well. You speak less, but when you do speak, people listen more carefully. Your calmness contrasts sharply with the emotional reactions around you. Your silence becomes a signal that your attention is valuable, and people instinctively respect what appears scarce. But the greatest transformation is internal. The urge to prove yourself disappears. The desire to win arguments fades. You realize that your intelligence was never meant to serve as entertainment for people who reject it. It was meant to guide your own path, to help you build a life that reflects clarity instead of chaos. And once you reach that stage, foolish people lose their power over you completely. Their opinions stop disturbing you. Their arguments stop draining you. Their attempts to provoke you simply fail, because you no longer grant them access to your mental energy. Schopenhauer once wrote that the greatest form of wisdom is learning to distinguish what deserves your attention from what does not. Most people never learn this distinction. They react to every stimulus around them, every comment, every criticism, every foolish statement. But the intelligent person eventually develops a filter, a quiet inner rule that decides what enters the mind and what is ignored completely. That filter is the true defense against stupidity. Not sharper arguments, not louder explanations, just disciplined attention. Once you control where your attention goes, you control the direction of your mind. And once you control your mind, the noise of foolish people becomes just that, noise. something that exists in the background, while you continue moving forward. But there is something important to understand before you leave this video. What we discussed here is only the outer layer of how intelligent minds deal with irrational people. These strategies help you protect your energy, navigate conversations, and avoid being dragged into pointless battles. But there is a deeper level to this psychology, a level where intelligence is not only defensive, but strategic, where understanding human weakness becomes a tool for influence rather than just protection. That territory moves beyond philosophy and into something much darker and far more complex. And it is not something most people are ready to hear. If this video made you see human behavior differently, then you have only scratched the surface. There are deeper principles of psychological strategy, influence, and mental discipline that cannot always be explored openly here. But if you want to continue exploring how powerful minds actually navigate a world filled with irrational behavior, start by doing one simple thing: subscribe to the channel, because the next videos will go even deeper into the hidden mechanics of human psychology, intelligence, and power. And once you start seeing these patterns clearly, you will never look at human interactions the same way again.